In March of 1945, as the Second World War in Europe moved toward its final months and Allied armies pressed steadily toward the heart of Germany, one obstacle still stood between them and a rapid advance into the interior of the collapsing Reich, and that obstacle was not a mountain range or a massive fortress, but a river whose history stretched back through centuries of European conflict and whose symbolic importance far exceeded its physical width. The Rhine River had long been regarded as Germany's natural defensive shield, a powerful geographic boundary that invading armies had struggled to cross in previous wars, and German commanders believed that if they could destroy every bridge spanning the Rhine, they could delay the Allied advance long enough to regroup, reorganize, and perhaps negotiate from a position slightly less desperate than total defeat. Most of those bridges had already been demolished as Allied forces approached from the west, leaving behind twisted steel and broken stone that fell into the water below. And so, when American units of the First Army neared the town of Remagen on March 7, 1945, they expected to find yet another span reduced to rubble, another crossing denied, another engineering challenge that would require days of preparation under pressure. Instead, through a combination of timing, confusion, and incomplete demolition efforts, they saw something astonishing rising above the river's gray surface, because the Ludendorff Bridge, built during the First World War and named after a German general of that earlier conflict, was still standing. The question that followed was immediate and enormous at the same time. Could it be taken before it was destroyed? And if it was taken, could it hold long enough to change the speed and direction of the war's final phase? As elements of the U.S. 9th Armored Division approached Remagen, they were not advancing with a detailed plan to seize a bridge intact, because intelligence reports had suggested that German forces were systematically destroying crossings over the Rhine, and American commanders assumed that any remaining structures would be rigged for demolition and guarded by troops prepared to carry out their orders without hesitation. When Lieutenant Karl Timmerman and his men caught sight of the Ludendorff Bridge, still spanning the river, the moment carried both opportunity and danger, because they understood that hesitation could mean watching it collapse into the Rhine, yet rushing forward without coordination could trigger explosives that had likely been placed along its steel framework and stone towers. German engineers had indeed prepared the bridge for demolition, but shortages of explosives, damaged wiring, and the chaotic state of retreating units had compromised their preparations, and when they attempted to detonate the charges as American troops advanced, the explosion damaged the structure but failed to destroy it completely, leaving the bridge shaken, scarred, and filled with smoke, yet still standing over the cold current below. In that fragile window between destruction and survival, American soldiers made a decision that required both courage and calculation, because they rushed forward across a structure that might collapse at any moment, aware that further charges could detonate and that defensive fire from the far bank remained a threat, yet convinced that the strategic advantage of securing a crossing point justified the risk. Engineers followed close behind the assault troops, searching for additional demolition charges, cutting wires, and neutralizing explosives as quickly as possible, while commanders on both sides grasped the magnitude of what was happening, because if the bridge could be held, Allied forces would gain an unexpected foothold east of the Rhine, accelerating operations that German planners had hoped to delay. News of the bridge's capture traveled rapidly up the chain of command, reaching General Omar Bradley and General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who recognized that this unplanned opportunity could reshape their timetable for entering Germany's industrial heartland, and reinforcements were ordered forward to expand and secure the bridgehead before German forces could mount an effective counterattack. Securing the bridge was only the beginning, because the structure had suffered significant damage during the failed demolition attempt, and the weight of tanks, artillery, and supply vehicles placed enormous stress on its compromised supports, forcing engineers to work continuously to reinforce its spans and monitor its stability, while traffic flowed almost non-stop across its narrow roadway. German forces launched artillery fire and air attacks in attempts to destroy the bridge from a distance, understanding that its existence represented not merely a tactical inconvenience, but a symbolic breach of the Rhine's defensive line. And although these efforts inflicted further damage and created tense conditions for those crossing, the bridge remained operational long enough for thousands of American troops and vehicles to move eastward, establishing a strong presence on the far bank. Meanwhile, additional pontoon bridges were constructed nearby, reducing reliance on the increasingly unstable Ludendorff Bridge and ensuring that even if it failed, the crossing would not be entirely lost. And on March 17, 1945, 10 days after its capture, the bridge finally collapsed into the Rhine due to accumulated structural damage. Yet by that time, its strategic purpose had already been fulfilled. The foothold established at Remagen allowed Allied forces to advance more quickly into central Germany, compressing defensive lines and complicating German efforts to coordinate resistance. And historians later noted that although the bridge's survival was partly accidental, the rapid decision to seize and exploit it reflected the flexibility and initiative that characterized the Allied advance during the war's final months in Europe. Behind the maps and communiques were individuals who experienced those days not as abstract turning points, but as hours filled with tension, exhaustion, and responsibility. Because engineers crawling beneath the bridge's steel beams understood that their work determined whether thousands of others could cross safely, and infantrymen who rushed forward during the initial seizure knew that hesitation could cost the opportunity entirely. Lieutenant Timmerman later reflected on the improbability of the moment, acknowledging that no one had expected to find the bridge intact and that decisions were made rapidly under conditions that offered little time for deliberation. And yet those decisions demonstrated how initiative at the tactical level can influence strategic outcomes in ways that even senior commanders might not anticipate. 4 German officers responsible for defending the crossing. The failure to destroy the bridge as intended represented not only a military setback, but a symbol of a broader collapse in coordination and resources. Because by March 1945, the German war effort faced shortages, disrupted communications, and the cumulative strain of years of conflict. And the incomplete demolition at Remagen reflected those systemic weaknesses. The capture of the Ludendorff Bridge did not by itself end the war in Europe, nor did it eliminate the fierce fighting that continued in other regions, but it accelerated the Allied timetable and demonstrated that even in the war's final phase, unexpected developments could alter operational plans in significant ways. The story of the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen is not simply a tale of a structure that survived an explosion, but a reminder that history often turns on moments when preparation meets unforeseen opportunity. Because although no grand strategy had anticipated the bridge's survival, the readiness of American units to act decisively transformed a chance event into a strategic advantage. It also illustrates how infrastructure, often overlooked in narratives focused on battles and leaders, can shape the tempo of war in profound ways. Because rivers, bridges, and supply routes determine not only where armies can move, but how quickly they can influence events beyond the horizon. As we reflect on the bridge that stood when it was expected to fall, perhaps the enduring lesson is this: when unexpected opportunity appears in the midst of uncertainty, are we prepared to recognize it and act with clarity? Or do we allow hesitation to close the window that history briefly opens before us?